Hello again, everybody. This is James Bartley, and you're listening to the Cosmic Switchboard Show. Today, my very special guest is David Wargon. David has been on our show before, talked about some of his ET experiences, and David has come back to share it once again. So without any further ado, David Wargon, welcome back to the Cosmic Switchboard.
Thank you, James. Thanks for having me back on.
I've been looking forward to having you back on the show, David, because you offer very good insight about a wide variety of issues, surface level as well as what's going on deep, dark recesses of consciousness and reality. So you have the floor, David. What are the things that you feel moved to talk about on this occasion?
Well, I'm going to be speaking about some past experiences that happened to me up to present day as well. Since I already covered the UFO basis, I'm going to go ahead and cover some, I guess, unusual phenomenon, even if it's as little as can be. Speaking to many people, they feel that, maybe it was just something that would happen to be a trick of their eye or just a sound that maybe they just put it off as something else. But I've discovered that even the little things can mean a very big thing to many people. So that's what I want to cover today. I grew up in Trenton, New Jersey. It wasn't a very nice area, but as I grew up, I always had life experiences of all different kinds, paranormal mostly. As far back as I can remember, is even being in the crib. I remember there was an instance where I was inside of a crib crying, and I happened to look over, and there was a dark figure standing in the corner of my room. And this dark figure, which was odd enough, it was almost like I was looking into myself, walked over to the crib and stared down at myself and was able to lay down, almost into him, almost like something was being given to myself, if that makes any sense. It's kind of like a first and second person perspective. And that happened there. That was like one of my earliest memories. I was able to describe the whole room and everything, and my parents were very shocked about that.
This entity, this dark shadow figure, what kind of energy or what did you sense from its being, its nature, if you have memories of that?
What I basically remember is nothing negative, honestly. It was more like something was given, like a form of consciousness, or possibly, I'm a bit of a believer that a soul is given to a young one, at a certain point. I don't believe so much in the womb, but more when they're born, like they're given the gifts of, maybe like a soul or intellect, or possibly even a cosmic gift. And I think that's what happened during that one. And the weird part is almost like, okay, here you are again. Let's go ahead and we're going to be put into this vessel here and start over.
What was the next seminal event or events in your life? How old were you when that happened?
As far as I remember, maybe 6 months old.
Wow.
Yeah. And, and that was only one of the vague memories I had, and they say you're not supposed to really have memories of that far. But I've spoken to a few people who do remember having some form of memory at that age, and being that young. It's just, I think, throughout the life, you just happen to put some behind you and forget about it. But I do believe that what I witnessed was actually happening.
Well, yeah, just to interject for a second, I remember Damien, what was his last name? He had come out with a series of books about near-death experiences some years ago, and he talked about when people go through their life review, it's, if you're laying in a crib and then you're going through the life review, you will remember everything. Yeah, you will remember, the leaves rustling in the wind outside the window. You will remember the house creaking. Even as a little baby, it's all stored, whether it's the subconscious or some kind of information field. It's all there. We just have to, tap into it.
Yes, and I do believe it. I do believe that, and I've personally have a pretty close to a photographic memory. I remember past events pretty accurately, and the only thing that takes a trigger is maybe a smell or a certain song or something like that. And then the entire event could come back almost instantaneously. And even things that you may have forgotten or just haven't thought about maybe in 20, 30 years.
Yeah, it's interesting how memories work and how they're so attached to feelings and scents and odors. Uh, Take us along, the journey. What
Sure.
happened next that was, really formative in your upbringing?
Well, everyone has an imaginary friend growing up, or at least pretty much everyone does. And then when I was younger, I had claimed an imaginary friend when I was about 2 or maybe 3 years old, and with a very unusual name of Goppy. And not many people have heard that name. Well, one time it was snowing real bad in New Jersey, and my parents took me outside and play in the snow, and they met with the neighbor, and the neighbor happened to hear me mention the name Gobby, and they said that how long did he have that imaginary friend? They asked my parents, and my parents said, "Oh, maybe just about a week or two." And they looked over at my parents and said, "That's really odd because we just lost a very close friend of ours who happened to be a barber named Gobby about 2 or 3 weeks ago due to a heart attack." and I always had that form of spiritual connection. Things would, even to this day, would follow me around or come and stay with me, and that's something that happened to me that was pretty, made my parents' head turn as far as what they told me. But I used to remember would have a whole series of imaginary friends, up to about 20 of them with all different names, ethnic backgrounds, everything. And sometimes I would even be in my living room playing with my Legos or something, just off of my own little world. And I would visually see people walking through the walls or the doors in spacesuits.
Whoa.
And I would question that. I would say, why are you in a spacesuit? And they would reply back, because we can't breathe your air. And that's all they would say. And they would just walk right through the house. And, I'd put it off like, whatever, and just, it was a common occurrence. And to me, it didn't matter, but my parents kind of got used to me talking to myself with these kind of entities that would always show up, including animals as well, too.
Yeah, tell us about some of the animal experiences.
Well, I had a couple dogs that would show up in the house. My wife and I would actually have what we call the invisible cat would show up. My wife is kind of a half and half believer in the paranormal, but she would always say that we would be laying in bed together and we'd feel footsteps walking on the bed, and it was two sets. You can feel it, and this two steps of would come right up between us and lay down. You would actually feel the covers just indenting right there, and we had cats at the time, but we'd go and both of us go feel an empty spot right there, and there'd be nothing there. So, and this happens, pretty much wherever we go. It seems like there's always an invisible cat following us around that just lays around. I call it our little protector. So I said, it never seemed to really ever cause any issues. So I don't mind it being there.
Have you ever had any dreams of cats coming to you and,
Not so much
communicating
cats,
with you?
wolves. I've had a lot of.
Oh, okay.
I believe is one of my spirit animals is a gray wolf, and I usually have dreams whenever they're intense, especially through some of the Anunnaki experiences. I would have some form of a gray wolf standing on my left side on me all the times, and it was always my protector. And one time it turned into a red timber wolf, but it was very fascinating. I have the certain wolves there with me. Or even some sort of a lion every once in a while. I have some pretty good, strong, protective animals with me.
Well, that's good. It's very totemic, shamanistic. There's a Native American sensibility to that too. And this house was that still in Trenton, New Jersey?
It's been through the animals' visions of the wolf has been mostly in Georgia.
Oh, okay.
Through the cat was usually in Georgia. Ever since my wife and I move around a lot, but we was mostly from Atlanta all the way to, I've even felt them here now that I'm living in Oklahoma, and even felt them there too. So I can definitely tell it's something that's definitely connected to us very strongly. And I like it. Like I said, the other cats never come around when it's around, so I don't know if it's something they see or sense and they just stay away or whatnot. But, I do see them acting up every once in a while when I feel them around and they start staring at stuff or running from it. You can kind of tell.
Now, we've heard a lot of stories about Georgia over the years as being a mystical, almost supernatural place. The Native Americans, the Cherokee, have their own stories. What can you tell us about the times you've been in Georgia, the kind of experiences you had?
Well, the closer to Atlanta, I've had the most. I'm really a firm believer in the ley line theory. That there's energy lines going across the earth, but much like acupuncture and people. We lived in Sandy Springs once, and it was our first apartment. And that one there, we always had a sense of fear while we lived there. One time, that's when I first became awakened. I went through the whole very unusual process. As I was talking to many awakened individuals, and I seem to be the only one that's gone through this kind of intensity. When I first became awakened, it was almost like someone was taking my crown chakra and ripping it open with crowbars. I know that sounds weird, but that's the only way I can truly describe it. It's almost like someone was prying open my head, and I could feel for 2 weeks. It was this intense. It wasn't a headache, but it was just a intense feeling of like there was work being done on it. It was. I could see sparkles of light. I could see purple. The color purple was overwhelming sometimes. Like I had to pull over the side of the road one time driving because all I could see was purple. I couldn't even see the road. It was intense, and I could feel almost like fingers like on top of my head. And then after the 2 weeks was over, it closed up, and then it went to my third eye. And for 6 months, my third eye was the same way. It was just being worked on. And that's when I would start seeing more and more purple and hues of blue and sparkling lights. And it was an incredible journey, but when it hit, it was like every kind of ability kind of opened up. I was given psychic readings, and I was remote viewing, and I was trying to think of what else I was doing. I was, doing anything that I was trying everything out, and there's nothing I couldn't do. But what I come to find out was that there were certain things I didn't really want to do. Like I did not like giving the readings because of the people were constantly questioning me or doubting it or trying to test me, or a lot of people just didn't understand what a psychic reading actually was, and then the best way I would put it, I said, well, it's like if you're going to say you're going to win the lottery, but if you never play it, how are you ever going to win it?
Yeah.
Yeah. But when we moved from our first apartment, which I'll go back to our first apartment, I would see black shadows running across the room. We would have the feeling of just eeriness. Like my wife and I felt this dread, like someone was trying to kill us in there one time. So we went to the store. We went to Walmart just to get our heads clear, and we picked up this DVD of An Endless Beach, it was called. And we put it in, and it was almost like our sanctuary. It was just, we sat there together and fell asleep on the sofa just listening to the sounds of the beach and rolling, and the feeling went away. It was really strange. It was trying to bring us down. So we moved to just down the block, to another place, and that's when the experiences really started to hit. I was going to get I was seeing some really weird things there. One morning I was brushing my teeth. I heard my name as clear as day be called to me. And, I was the only one in there. One morning I woke up and I saw the entire wall in front of me, which was a gigantic white wall in trinary. It was very fascinating. It was zeros, ones, and twos. And I never even nearly knew what binary even truly was, but this wall was almost very similar to the Matrix, and it was, moving, and the ones and zeros were just moving, pretty rapidly, but these twos were going very slowly. And then I thought to myself, well, what's up with the twos? And this voice in my head said, that's the aging process of the construct. It says, that's why it's moving slowly. The paint starts to fade, the wall starts to rot, and that kind of thing. And I thought it was very fascinating, just listening. But this happened for like 15, 20 seconds. I'm staring at this wall of trinary in front of me, and it was green and white on the white background. It was really strange. I wish I could have wrote down the numbers if it meant anything, but I never. It was so many of them. There was no way I could have. And then one morning I woke up and my wife was standing in the doorway, and there was what I felt was what's it called? The creatures that you can't see, archons. To me, it felt like an archon or a form of troll almost. It was a round, almost the size of a tennis ball, and it had this really weird kind of snout with a smile of sharp teeth and these round eyes, and it was up in the corner of the wall, right up above her head, and it was moving slowly. And I screamed out, "What the hell is that?" Right up above your head. And she looked over, and there was nothing there. And I'm like, I'm still staring at this thing. I'm like, it's right there. And then with an instant, it disappeared. I mean, I was able to see this weird parasite creature, and that really made me think that there is things there you can't see, and they do affect. I think they attach themselves to you, and they do affect your mood or your addictions or whatever. And it was scary looking, I have to say, for as small as it was. And to think that you really can't see these things was definitely an eye opener.
And your wife felt no energy or sensation from it.
She's not as sensitive as I am towards them. She knew I was seeing something because I was being very sincere, and I was in awe and shock when I saw this thing because it was just there staring at me. And it wasn't very big. Like I said, it was the size of a tennis ball, but it was enough to be upside down on the roof, right above her head. And it was bizarre, just to see this thing. I've never seen it again after that, but I can definitely feel that there's probably more than we would ever anticipate.
Do you think a lot of the things that happen in Georgia are attributable to, well, you mentioned ley lines earlier, but like some of the Native Americans, they talk about other states like Kentucky being haunted, basically. And we've heard stories about, Georgia, and there's a lot of Sasquatch activity there. Do you think there's something about the location itself that predisposes certain types of people like yourself to being able to see more things and experience more things?
I do. I feel that because, and this is my theory, is that the closer to the city you get, the more frequency, the more energy is there. Like, you got more people, you have more, buildings using electricity, more cell phone towers, more EMPs happening, and I think it's opening, portals on the other side. Because when I moved to Nicholson, Georgia, which is up near the South Carolina border, it was about 100 miles from Atlanta, and it was definitely a lot more relaxed. I really had a lot less experiences. Actually, they dwindled down dramatically. Only ones I have is there's a couple cemeteries nearby, and I'd have a couple of, dreams of, well, it wasn't dreams, but it was like a half sleep. Someone was laying down next to me, and I was trying to ward it away. But other than that, like any type of UFO sightings or any type of paranormal sightings or anything like that, I did not see out there. But that's what I kind of came up with a theory: is the closer you are to the cities, the more energy. Kind of like what CERN's doing, with the Hadron Collider, is just adding more and more energy, possibly causing more and more portals or doorways to open. I think that is very plausible, and I don't think that the energies are all that great. There is some positive to it, but from what I've seen and what I've gathered is, there's a lot of ones out there that are definitely have to be cautious around.
Well, Atlanta, and even the name Atlanta, I don't know if it refers to Atlantis or what, but it has an interesting past. And, I like to study the American Civil War. And of course, there was a big battle and a series of battles and a siege of Atlanta from a, portal perspective. But, if you look at it from a parallel on Earth three-dimensional perspective, Atlanta became a focal point because all these roads and railroads converged on Atlanta. So naturally it drew the federal armies down, from the north, and then you had this big battle there. With your ability to see kind of into other dimensions and other realms, have you ever seen anything that might be related to the Civil War, the things that happened there? Because I know that the area was like emotionally and psychically scarred by the events of the Civil War.
Well, I I feel that the satanic cults and are very, very, very strong in Atlanta, especially where I lived in Nicholson. I have tons of photos of war memorials and the lodges and everything like that, of just like the Black Cube of Saturn and obelisks everywhere, including around the University of Georgia. But what I've witnessed in Georgia, and not many people come out and really talk about any type of paranormal, or UFO or anything like that in Georgia. They usually just are so silent about it, but the amount of attitude and aggression in people out there is just horrible. Like when I just recently moved out to Oklahoma, and everyone's actually very pleasant out here, very, very nice. And I realized just how angry and aggressive I was, because you become your surroundings, and it's just amazing. It was like I told my wife, I said, we're gonna have to learn to be nice, because we didn't realize just how aggressive it is out there, and between the drivers and the attitudes. I mean, it was almost feeling like New Jersey again in Georgia, but here it's a lot different, it's a lot smoother, but. What we have caught some Civil War figures on camera in Savannah, outside Savannah, at one place we used to go camping. And I actually have a couple of photographs of Civil War people in uniform the heads are like above their bodies by about a foot or two. And it's very unusual, because for it to be a natural phenomenon, I mean, I've went back and through and took pictures of it, and I was still never able to find it again, but I'll have to send those to you sometime.
Yeah, I would like to, because that was where Sherman's army marched to when they left Georgia. They destroyed a lot of things in their path, and then they made their way to Savannah to get resupplied by the Federal Navy. So, they had to have a battle to take Savannah. So, and then I think, if memory serves, there's a nuclear, Department of Energy plant there where they make nuclear plutonium for the nuclear weapons and the thermonuclear weapons and whatnot. So they've got it all going on in the state of Georgia. And then when I hear stories about the Sasquatch, about the Bigfoot, about the little people, some of the locals and some of the Native Americans talk about little diminutive people that have been there all along. Have you heard stories along those lines about Sasquatch and about the little people?
I personally have not. There are some good researchers out there for it, but that really wasn't into my field. But I will tell you one thing about the Georgia, and it's very strange, is they don't like trees, and I know that sounds really funny, but it was one of our things where we found a land that had, a beautiful patch of trees or maybe some form of nature trail or something, they would demolish it. They would literally rip it all out and build a subdivision in it. And that's all that was going on in Georgia, was nothing but subdivisions. And it was the same thing over and over again. It was the same exact look, same exact places going into these lands, and then they were putting the same exact stores right next to them. I mean, it was almost like it didn't matter where you lived; it was exactly the same all over the place. And they were ripping out. I mean, we lived next to a logging company in Nicholson, and it was right along the train tracks, and it sickened me just to see how many trees were being pulled and ripped out on a daily basis. You're talking about probably about 40, 50 trucks worth just going there, dropping off logs, and then going on the train and taking off every day.
Wow.
And it's disturbing. I mean, the air quality was starting to go down. You could feel it. Like, we used to live in a place called Alpharetta, but it was away from the richier city area, and it was in this more country area, and it was a piece of heaven. It was gorgeous out there. And then after we were out there for about 5 years, and all of a sudden, all this beautiful landscape, they said, "Oh, we're going to develop on it." They ripped it all out and put $750,000 houses out there, and that was it. It was gotten too expensive to live there. They're trying to accommodate all the Hollywood stars and everything, because it's becoming a very big movie hub out in Atlanta, and they're trying to put them out there. So, so we moved further north, but so is all the people that are also lower to middle income are moving up north too. So it's starting to grow up there as well too. So I was very happy to get out of there, but I really felt that, if there is any type of Sasquatch movement or anything like that, it would have to be further in north in the mountains area, or more, maybe even South Georgia. But I even heard South Georgia was being built like crazy too.
Oh, that's sad, because my mental image of the countryside of Georgia is like forest and trees and woodland and stuff. So it's like the land is being denuded. It's being kind of raped.
No, it is, and it's mostly farmland when you go to central Georgia and everything like that. Like acres upon acres of farmland. Even where the Georgia Guidestones are. I've been out in Elberton before, and it's just nothing but farmland out there, and smack dab in the middle. There you go. There's the Guidestones. I mean, I drove right past them, didn't even know it.
Now, you were in this house and this community in Georgia where you felt kind of this negative presence, and then you moved elsewhere, I guess, to try to get away from it. And then, take us from there. It's like, what other things during your voyage of self-discovery and, with your wife there with you, did you experience?
I was able to, have a lot more of UFO interaction as well too. Like, my first one, as I said in my last video, was down in Destin, Florida, while sitting on the beach. And then, then they started appearing when I got back the next week from the beach. They started appearing more there at the house, at the apartment we were living in. And I was starting to have out-of-body experiences, very interesting ones, going to the Orion constellation and being around Mars or even around the Earth. And then they became extremely aggressive. Like I was feeling things being experimented on me, extracted from me. And then from there, my abilities started changing. Every time I try to do an out-of-body experience or try to do an astral projection, it's almost like I get shoved right back in. I can't all go but maybe a few feet out, and then I get shoved back in. It's almost that's the most disturbing one, and I don't like that because I like to explore. But that's when, after that moment, things really started changing for me. I started getting more into more of the earthly problems that we're having here. Trying to help expose and inform the public, but unfortunately, some people knew what was going on in Georgia, but they just refused to want to either get outside of the norm or do anything about it. And it was very much like you're a loner there. I was almost like the lone wolf. No one really wanted to be too close to me. But as for the experiences, they started to become more negative. I started seeing more shadowy figures, started getting more senses of just, eeriness, of wanting to escape or whatnot, and one thing I have learned is if my emotions get very, very high, like if there's a death in the family or even just pure aggravation, I have the ability to create storms. I know that sounds going to sound far-fetched for a lot of people, but I've experienced this with about 5 times, to where if my emotions get reached to the peak, a storm and a perfectly blue sky will form right up above me, and it will sometimes rain, sometimes will thunder, and then it will just go away once I calm down. And I'm really a firm believer in that. And I also even saw an episode of the X-Files a long time ago of that actually happening.
The Rain Man, yeah.
Yeah.
Episode.
Yeah, and I was very fascinated by that because I felt, okay, maybe this isn't just something I can do. Maybe it is others can do. And I really feel that, if there's a traumatic thing that happens in the world somewhere, I believe that it can cause all that energy, because we are energy based, can cause those kind of issues. And I think that's what Tesla was practicing with.
Yeah, and it's the ability. We are kind of like capacitors. We're energy fields, and if we learn how to store energy, and if we learn how to discharge it properly, we can do those things. I mean, Rolling Thunder, the late great intertribal medicine man, he used to go around creating electrical thunderstorms, and it was part of the shamanic tradition in Mongolia, where the shamans working for the Mongols would dish out some thunderstorms and stuff, because they knew some of the other tribes on the steppe had supernatural phobia about electrical thunderstorms. And I've been in electrical thunderstorms, folks, in Texas, where 360 degrees all the way around, tremendous thunderclaps and lightning coming down to the ground. I mean that's scary. Where the whole house is shaking. I mean, you might have experienced that. So when that's part of the phobia base of a particular foe, that's quite a propaganda psyop tool to have a shaman whip out friggin' thunderstorms or hail or whatever the case may be, because that spooks the heck out of the enemy.
Well, it's true, and I really have noticed throughout being in my 20s and 30s is that I've noticed that my emotions are more neutral. I can keep them on a neutral basis, and I think that's the reason why. It's just I don't try to go over the edge. If something irritates me and it finally just vents out, then it usually can cause some cloudiness or whatnot, but it has to be to the peak, and it's a very interesting one. I almost wish I could control it a little bit better, but it's definitely something that I've proven to myself that does exist. And I've actually had a couple more experiences going back to New Jersey that's kind of popped back in there. I was just I remember I actually used to I had an out of body experience once, I think when I was going to say 7. I can't really remember how old I was at the time, but you remember ever having something under your bed that you were scared to death of?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I used to have 2 men who used to live under my bed as well. I said there was a heavy-set Italian guy and a thin Italian guy, and everyone starts laughing at that. And I'm like, yeah, but they're dressed in 1920s clothes. They have the little cap on with the kind of the just overthrow jacket on that's from the kind of the Depression era kind of deal, and they would scare the crap out of me when I was a kid. I would they were very violent. The heavier one would curse a lot, and the thinner one would just try to calm him down, but he was still kind of aggressive, and they were there for probably a good 2 years.
My.
And I would tell them not to steal my stuff all the time when I was a kid, because things would go missing in my room, and I'd tell them I'd want it back, and it would reappear in the same exact spot where I knew I looked. And so anyway, one night I was going to bed, and they decided to finally reveal themselves. They came out from under the bed and took me out of my bed, and it was my spirit self, and I was dragged. I remember locking onto the wall and trying to scream for my parents, help me, these guys are taking me, but nothing would come out. And they took me all the way to my backyard and left me there in my backyard, and that was my first experience. I don't ever remember anything else after that, whether or not anything else happened or whatnot, but I don't even remember going back, but I do remember that experience, and that was my first one. And ever since then, that they disappeared from under my bed and never came back. It was really strange, of experience. Then I had one once where, I actually had a few in contact with fairies, believe it or not, and I do firmly believe that they exist, or at least the fairy energy does. One time I lost my last tooth, and this is a tooth fairy one if you want to laugh at it. But my parents had a little too much to drink the night before, so they kind of went to bed, and I had a tooth. My last one was always on my windowsill, and I woke up the next morning, it was still there. So I said, okay, they must have forgot to give me my 50 cents. So I walked up in that morning, walked past my parents' bedroom. My dad was knocked out, and he was a very heavy sleeper. Normally, I don't get up to almost noon. And so I'd go into the kitchen, start talking to my mom, and all of a sudden, we heard this banging in my room, this really loud banging. And my dog started freaking out, so she ran into the bedroom, and she was a big Doberman. And she ran to the bedroom, started barking at the walls. I go in there, and I see this orb of light hitting the window, like as hard as it could. And it was almost like it either couldn't get out. And my mom's sitting there, she can't see anything. The dog's barking, I'm sitting there looking. And all of a sudden, it just goes right through the wall. It was almost like it wanted me to see it. And then there was 50 cents dropped right there on the windowsill.
Wow. Wow.
And the weird part was, everyone was like, well, maybe your mom did or your dad did. I said, my dad was still knocked out in the bed. My mom was in my sight the whole time. They said, did you keep the 50 cents? I said, no, I never did. I was young at the time. But it was really interesting for that. And then I had another fairy experience in my house in Alpharetta. My wife lost her engagement ring, and she couldn't find it to save her life. She looked all over for it. And I had this urge, after I dropped her off at work, there was a Barnes & Noble down the street. So I had this urge to go into Barnes & Noble, and I stumbled upon this book that was Fairies 101 by Doreen Virtue. And I decided to go ahead and buy it, for no reason. And went ahead and bought it and read it, and it says you can ask the fairies for anything, and they'll, as long as you pay them back, they'll. So I said, okay. I said, well, let's try this. Let's try. I said, let's go ahead and get my wife's engagement ring back. So I went ahead and did that. I asked for it, and did a little ritual in the book. And she was cooking the night before, like all 4 burners burning, full blast, cooking stuff. And I go take her to work, and I had this urge to clean the stove afterwards. And as I lift up one of the burners, there her engagement ring is right next to the burner.
Wow.
Right there. This thing should have been melted. Because it was on that gas stove that was all 4 burners going, and it didn't even have a scorch mark on it, didn't have dirt on it. It was just there, lying there perfectly. And this ring's been missing for a good 2 months. And I was amazed. I gave him a whole bunch of treats in the backyard. And say, here you go. Thank you so much for it. But that was a truly interesting experience, and I was like, okay, these powers do exist, and as long as you respect them, I think that they'll be for your benefit.
Yeah, that's a very shamanic, Native American, old school mindset. When one watches like shows, like I like the show Rome. It was a TV drama for a couple of seasons. They take you from the time of the civil wars with Caesar, and then it finishes up with the start of Octavian/Augustus' reign. And then it was very accurate in many ways, except of course the Romans weren't that tall. They had all these big British actors playing Romans. But what was interesting was the centrality of the gods, quote unquote, in their lives. It's like, propitiating the gods, not pissing the gods off, not not doing things that the gods would be unhappy with, sacrificing to the gods, right? See, yeah. And that's kind of this bastardized version, maybe Atlantean, reptilian, that crept down through the ages and infiltrated all these societies. But the point being is, they knew that there was this unseen force behind the scenes that had a influence on human lives. And so, when we have that understanding, it helps us in many ways, right?
Yeah.
Where on the one hand we don't get obsessed by it, and we think that we have everything we do has to, involve propitiating the gods or the elementals or the fairies or whatever, because we still have free will, we still have to be accountable to ourselves, but at the same time recognizing that these things exist, right? And so, listening to you, David, you're one of those people that you've always kind of had one foot in this world and one foot in whatever other dimension happened to be nearby. And in my own voyage of discovery, when I went through similar things, and not quite like that, but gradually over time, it just brick by brick, it takes down these paradigm walls where you start off as a golden child, and then the school programming, the dogmas, the religion, it all kicks in, and then brick by brick, as time goes on, you have more and more of these inexplicable experiences. After a while, those dogmas, none of that applies anymore. The bogus science that's taught in the schools, it doesn't apply anymore, because that you've gone through stuff that's by normal scientific standards are unexplainable.
Yeah, and I was actually born and raised Catholic, both from my parents and my grandparents. My grandparents practiced it more. My parents just sent me through it. But, I was actually removed from the Catholic school by the 6th grade because I questioned it so much they finally just kicked me out. I was very much like, I forgot his name, Chariots of the Gods.
Von Daniken, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, or I'm, and there are many other ones that were just, questioned the Catholic faith and the rituals and the Bible and all that stuff, and they don't like people asking questions, And according to my mother, which I vaguely remember, but I was in second grade and we were about to receive our first communion, and I caused a riot because I said to them, well, we had to take a paper test in order to get our first communion. I said, well, if we're all willing to go ahead and receive the bread of Christ or whatever, I said, then why do we have to take a test to prove that? And everyone agreed with me, and they put their pencils down, and no one took the test. And, and I said, that sounds like me. So yeah, I was under the flag of the Catholic Church when I was younger, and then when I had my first nun teacher at fourth grade, she hated my guts. I was singled out and tormented for the entire school year, to where she even physically harmed me. She actually grabbed my arm and then took her nails and ripped my skin off my arm. Like,
oh, jeez.
I was bleeding down my arm and everything. I mean, she even had the audacity, wanted to fail me and keep me in her class one more year to sort of have another year of torment.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, that's how bad it was. She was, and her name was Sister Faith, which was even more remarkable. But yeah, she after her stint with that, she made her like dean of the students or something like that. And I was just, rewarding this demonic behavior, much like the pedophile priests that are happening right now. I'm not saying all of them are bad. I said I think there's some very good priests out there, but these other ones that are just out there doing these things and getting rewarded or just transferred to another parish is just ridiculous.
Yeah, they just play shuffle the deck with them, and they just move them from one place to another, and then they're just protected. Now, you mentioned earlier that over time, I can't remember exactly what time period in your life, but you mentioned this ability that developed where you started to become a reader, giving people readings, kind of mediumistic in a way. And when you had these abilities before you stopped doing readings, without giving too much away, because I know a lot of it's private, how would the impressions emanate from the people you were giving the readings, and how did you perceive them? And what was your particular gift in that regard? Where did you have visions and images or clear thoughts about these people, or how did that transpire?
Well, I belonged to this, when I first became awakened, I was drawn to this website, and it was, what was it called? Well, I can't remember what it's called, but anyway, it was this man in England named Neil Shepherd, and he started up this website with very much similar to yours, but without the stories. It was more a self-guided help website.
Uh-huh.
It was from everything, every walk of life, explaining, things and in very small detail. He made little videos about it and everything like that. And it was very enlightening. So, but he also had a chat room on there, and he only allowed, awakened individuals or people who would contribute to the group on there, and he screened it very well. And I bumped into a few people from Ireland and Germany, and was speaking to them, and who are very much awakened as well too. And excuse me, sorry, the sirens are going past. I'm outside on my porch. But anyway, so we would sit there and chat, and while I was going through the awaken process, I was able to go ahead and give some readings to a certain group of people, and just talking to them, they said I was about 90% correct, just giving the readings, but I was better with the remote viewing. I would actually have either dreams of remote viewing of, I know this one woman in Germany, I had this, we would basically just have a sighting or a vision, and we would just go ahead and start typing randomly saying, I don't know who this is connected to, but this is the vision I had. And this one woman in Germany says, yeah, that's exactly where I jog. I confirmed a train that ran through her jogging area, the color of it, the heavily wooded area. And then my friend in Ireland, I described everything in her house, even what she was cooking for dinner. I was so in tune that I could actually, even smell the food that was being cooked, and and everything. It was quite amazing, actually. Just she said I was about 97% accurate, and, at the time, and I thought it was really neat. And then we did this psychic 101 class at my local metaphysical shop that I really trusted, and they're real nice people. And it was called the Inner Space, and I was in Atlanta. And they actually, the only thing I didn't do too well on was, believe it or not, was the remote viewing. I did everything else right. I did the psychicness of the person standing behind me, what they were drawing on their pad or what cards they were holding. I was very good at that. But I guess because I wasn't in the right zone, I wasn't even very good at the remote viewing part. But it was those kind of abilities there, and just it kind of shifted. But it was the psychic reading. It was the one I liked doing, but it was the doubting myself, because I have some confidence issues with certain things until I've done it for a long time. That when people kept questioning it or kept trying to throw a curveball in there, I was like, I don't like doing this. The Inner Space kept trying to get me to try the new psychic thing, and I wasn't comfortable with it. So I said, this really isn't for me.
Yeah, you got to do something that resonates within, and if you're getting resistance to it, it's something. Well, you're always going to have the ability, and you can just use it on as needed basis, right? Have there been times when you have utilized your abilities to protect yourself, or to gain some kind of advantage, or to help yourself and your family in some way?
I have not so much of well, if it has been for the help, I really don't know. I mean, it could have been possibly. I am a firm believer in karma, and I'm a firm believer in, take the good with the bad. Look for the bright side of a bad situation.
Yes.
Because there is a learning experience, and a lot of my friends will tell you that, if something bad happens, first thing I'll say is, well, look at the bright side. Maybe for this reason it didn't happen or whatnot. But, I did have some abilities when I was, growing up. A lot of people, deja vu is always questionable. What is deja vu? Is it a psychic premonition? Is it something we've already lived? Is it a glitch in the matrix? Who knows what it is. But there is one time where I was getting a lot of deja vu as a child. And I know this is really small, but, it did happen. But as I got deja vu with a child, I remember I was playing gin rummy with my mom. And I remember that in this one moment of deja vu, I had this urge where I put down the wrong card and she won. And I decided to go ahead and say, okay, well, wait a minute. I remember this happening, or I remember everything. So let me go ahead and put this card down. And I wound up winning. And it was just like, I managed to change it just by managing to catch that deja vu at that exact instant.
Yeah.
It maybe even like driving too, you just decide to take another road, but that deja vu turned more into a gut instinct than an actual deja vu, after those moments of actually being able to play into it. So it's like even last night I was walking my dog around the neighborhood, and I had this horrible gut instinct not to go any further. And for whatever reason, and there was helicopters flying over, I guess they were looking for something or someone, but I decided to go ahead and just take a little U-turn and went right back to the house. The urge to run away the second I went down that road, or if I overstep my bounds at work or something like that, and I'm going to have to get called in the office, I'll have this urge in my stomach all day long until they say, oh, we need you to come to the office. And all of a sudden it's gone. It's almost like someone's thinking negative vibes, or some type of negative vibe is heading my way. And I'm like, once it goes away, I feel better. And it's really interesting, actually.
Have you noticed in the recent past, and I've talked to some people about this, that have the glass half full mentality that you just talked about, seeing the good side of things and learning even from adversity, right? Not in a Pollyanna, New Age la-di-da kind of way, but just taking things bit by bit. Okay, this is the predicament I'm in. This is the situation I'm in. This is the challenge I have. This, because I like to problem solve. I'm a problem solver by nature, right? And so I look at everything as kind of a challenge to kind of fix things, And so. Yes. Have you noticed over time that your ability to create, to manifest, that dynamic, has that started to creep into your life?
Yes, and and actually I help a lot of people with it as well too, because one of the biggest issue is that, everyone does it at first, but it just depends if you learn from it or not. Is when something negative happens, you blow up off the edge. You're just like, you're like, oh my God, this is the end of the world, blah, 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 blah. And the first thing I tell people is, is that the more you worry, the less it's going to get fixed. And that's one thing I have, because I'm not at all firm believer in the new age at all. I mean, you have to have negative, you have to have positive. It's got to be a balance. That's just how it really is. If you ignore it, in which I've seen many people ignore it, they wind up exploding with it at one point in their life, or they're trying to suppress something. And actually, just take a little sidetrack, that actually happened to that friend of mine that was in Ireland. She was new age, and she was all about, she was an angel, and she didn't have any negativity in her life. But when I started talking to her and started, people have this ability, I have this ability to open up deep wounds in people without even trying or even asking, or they find the confidence in me, and they tell me everything has happened. I've had friends who said their parents tried to kill them, or people have been raped or whatever. And it's like, whoa, you're telling me this. So I just learned to accept it as I went on. And she told me that she told me about her life story and everything. And then all of a sudden, the second she told me that, everything in her life changed. Like, she was in a dead end marriage. She was not in a love marriage. So she got out of the marriage. She found someone that made her happy. She's opened up a bookstore for herself, and she got her life on track. And from what I gathered, and after that, every time I help a person, they just vanish. I never see them again. And it's very typical. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to help this person, but I'll never see you again. Bye.
It's like Michael Landon in Highway to Heaven, Okay, exactly. I'm going to walk down the road now.
Exactly. And the funny part is, it's completely the opposite. I'm not the one that's walking down the road. They are. Yeah.
Well, I've experienced something similar, David, where, people, I've heard this countless times. I've told you things I've never told anyone. I've told you things that I don't even admit to myself, or I've told to my closest friends or family. It's, I think some of us have this ability where they feel that they can open up to us. And we respect that trust. We will respect the fact that, in a moment of vulnerability, they share with us, right? So there's a big responsibility that comes with that. And there's a lot of frauds and deceivers in our field that, would exploit these moments of vulnerability, right? And try to manipulate that person. But, we're not of that ilk. So we do what we can to help these people. And what I'm seeing is that some people that have this manifesting ability, whether it's positive or negative, David, because it was a really interesting story you just told about the gal in Ireland, because I've seen the inverse of that, or the opposite rather, where these people that try so hard to suppress the negative, I don't talk about reptilians because that's just too negative, or I don't want to hear about that, or I don't want to hear about what's going on here or there. And then down the track, everything just explodes for them. They come down with a really bad terminal disease, or the relationship just totally unravels, and it turns out they've been in a crappy relationship all the time, and these are people that are always trying to keep everything positive, So it's like they try to bottle and suppress and submerge all this negativity in their life. They mask it with sugarcoating of feel-good kind of stuff, and then because the way this divine matrix works, they can't suppress it any longer. It just has to, come out into the open. And because they spent so much time and effort keeping everything submerged, when it comes undone, everything just flies apart. It comes apart at the seams, And so that's a very painful process to watch people go through. Instead of doing things in a controlled fashion, problem solve and kind of navigate your way through life and use intuition and goodwill and good fortune, and when it comes your way. I think what I'm also seeing is people that have this manifesting creative ability, despite the nature of this prison matrix, David, they're still bringing good fortune into their life in different ways. I'm seeing people that are, they're making the best for themselves in an environment, in a matrix, which is designed to imprison them spiritually and even physically.
Yeah, I really think that's why if you want to go for any type of form of mental health, that it's so expensive. I mean, you get what you pay for, or you get what the insurance pays for here, and I really feel that a lot of people are really scared that they're going to be put on instant medication the second they say, "Oh, I have a mental health problem," or "I have a problem I need to talk about," and it goes on their record and they can't do anything. Like, they'll be restricted from certain things. There's a lot of fear about that because and I think a lot of times too is they're also afraid that they can get locked up in an instant. And I believe it could be very possible. I almost question how many people are even locked up in mental institutions and stuff like that are truly have spiritual abilities, or more than just what they classify them under. Very much like the 1910 or 1920s, where the woman reporter went into undercover, and I read the article about it, where she went undercover into this mental institution, found out some people just couldn't even speak English. That's the reason why they were there. And,
Yeah.
And it was just appalling, and it was just amazing to, that, no one talks about the mental institutions anymore. They're shoved in a corner, and that's it, and it's scary.
It is. That's the beauty of having people like Jerry Marzinski and Sherry Sweeney come on the show, because they talk about things from a spiritual, supernatural, if you will, aspect, but from the mental health, psychological standpoint, where they're saying, look, these people aren't schizophrenics. There really are dark entities that are putting all these intrusive thoughts to their heads and foisting all these OCD negative thought loops upon them. And what they do, David, is just so insidious. And I've seen this, and you've probably seen this too, these people that are just consumed by self-doubt. They question every little thing. Oh, should I do this? No, if I do this, and this is going to happen. It's like they literally, because of the entities working through them, they create their own miserable existence. Mm-hmm. And the entities just laugh because it's the funniest thing for them to just use people like puppets on a string, get them to doubt themselves. And that just shows you how fearful these entities are of us and how powerful we are if they got to go through all this to make us doubt ourselves. And so we wind up creating this crappy kind of existence for ourselves instead of a life of abundance, of creativity, of dynamic, creativity. It's one of doubt, of fear, of vacillation, and I see this with a lot of people, David. It's really sad. Anyhow, we've reached the end of the first segment with our special guest, David Wargon, and we have so much more to go. So we'll see the members at the top of the next segment, and if you like what we do, if you believe in what we do, please go to thecosmicswitchboard.com, sign up and become a member, and we'll see you at the top of the next hour.